guys do your own introductions. I always felt very awkward when I was sitting there and someone was reading my bio. So we'll start with Drew, and we'll go to the back row, and then back from Mike this way.
Hi, everybody. Drew Jacoby Lemos with the Regional Airline Association.
Hi, Hunter Presti. I'm the Republican Staff Director on the House Aviation Subcommittee.
Hi, I'm Chris Brown, the Vice President for Government Affairs at the National Air Carrier Association.
Hi, I'm Mike Reynolds. I'm a Senior Public Policy Advisor at Baker Donelson, but not too long ago was with some of these House staffers. It's not even 2 weeks yet into the new work, but thank you.
Hello, Sharon Pinkerton. I'm the SVP of Policy at Airlines for America.
Brian Bell. I'm the Majority Staff Director for the Aviation Subcommittee, House Aviation Subcommittee.
Ron Solomon, Senior Counsel for the Commerce Committee, lead Chair Cantwell's efforts on the Aviation Subcommittee.
Great. So we have a great panel, and I'll just jump right into it. So I think folks forget that Congress is a political entity. Everything is guided by politics. It's very political. And so my first question is, what impact do you all feel the midterm elections could have on the reauthorization next year? I'm sure the staffers don't want to touch that one, but Mike, you can talk.
Sure, it plays a role more in how things proceed rather than necessarily the substance of what's going on. Aviation usually isn't too partisan of an issue, but the larger machinations that go on can affect what happens. If one chamber changes hands, you're going to have more time to kind of get new leadership in, from the top all the way down. That takes some time. So there's just factors even like that. If both chambers flip, it means perhaps one thing. If one chamber flips, it means something else. It's going to be interesting. There's going to be leadership changes regardless that can make a difference. And so there's both leadership changes going on as well as potential change in majority and minority. So obviously, Congressman DeFazio is retiring, so there's going to be someone new, top Democrat on the T&I panel, and Senator Wicker, who's the top Democrat on the Commerce Committee in the Senate, is moving over to head Armed Services Committee, and Senator Cruz seems to be on track to be the top Republican on the Commerce Committee, and it could be that Senator Wicker will be the Aviation Subcommittee top Republican. So those kind of changes can make some difference, and it takes some time to kind of iron out what's going on, organizing committees, subcommittees, and pushing things forward. I mean, if there are larger partisan brawls going on at a high level, sometimes that can just take away from the ability of staff to work on issues or finding floor time for certain matters. So it depends. It's a big question mark, but it can have an impact.
And it's very likely we won't know the outcome of some of the elections until early December. So
that's right.
So everybody stand by. It could be an interesting fall and winter. So committees have reached out to stakeholders and asked for their priorities. There's some talk that the Senate may hold hearings, even this fall, on reauthorization. And I have heard rumors that committee staff might even be putting pen to paper. So the cycle is upon us. We are really not in the thick of it, but we are at the beginning of the process. So I guess I'll ask this of everyone on the panel. What is your predictions in terms of the reauthorization schedule? We'll start with you, Drew.
Well, I think to Mike's point early on, there's going to be an organization process based on who's in charge. I think to our credit, to the staff's credit, on both sides, they've reached out early. It's a bipartisan process starting out, which makes it much easier on us as advocates to engage. But ultimately, I think the committees have to be responsive to the parties in power, so to speak. So hopefully, organization happens quickly, hearings happen, and we can give these guys some room to actually draft the legislation, and it can happen, on time. Maybe not by the end of September, but sometime within that first year, and we can get a long-term reauthorization.
You have anything to add, Hunter?
Yeah, well, we're hoping for on time, and that means by September 30th. So if you build that back, right, you have, bill to the Resolute desk by September 30th, and that probably means that you were going to ruin August and September trying to conference a bill together, and step that back, and all of a sudden we're looking at markups and floor time either in late spring or early summer. Now, like Mike just said, there's a million different things that can derail that, most of which are outside of our control. But it's going to be a sprint. I don't think there's going to be much rest in the first year of the 118th Congress, and for no other reason than in order to avoid getting tripped up by any kind of 2024 presidential politics. Moving quickly is going to be pretty key.
Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I'm an optimist, as you know, Holly, so these guys are doing the necessary legwork, being a stakeholder now rather than a staffer looking from the outside. They've solicited priorities from stakeholders, and as Mike would said, it just comes down to finding time on the calendar, and with the new Congress and leadership changes and committee membership changes, that takes a while. So hopefully we'll see some markups by the spring.
I'm going to come over here to Ron's. How about the Senate?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think as the other panelists have discussed, we've started the process with the reauthorization to the extent of getting feedback from stakeholders, and thank you very much for your submissions. I'd say that they vary in quality, but we won't disclose grades quite yet. Look, we have a lot of work to do, and we know that. That's why we got the process started early. As Hunter alluded, we fully expect no matter how much we start early, we'll be running around with our hair on fire next year heading into the reauthorization. So, we're hopeful, Holly, as you mentioned, to on the Senate side to do a few hearings to set a record out for reauthorization. So stay tuned as soon as potentially next week. And so we really are excited about the prospect. Look forward to working together across the aisles to work with the ideas that you propose, and of course the ideas that are yet to come, because we know that this is a dynamic process, and what we say today could change 6 months from now.
Yeah.
Brian, do you have anything to
I just want to echo everything everyone's already said. The timeline, we're going to have leadership changes on my committee, regardless of what happens, because the chair is leaving, so they're going to set their own timeline. But that in terms of introducing a bill in early spring, markup soon thereafter, and hopefully a conference sometime this summer seems like it's doable. But I'm under no illusion that it's going to be tough. We need to do it, but it's going to be tough. I mean, when's the last time we actually passed a bill without an extension beforehand? So the goal is to have it by September 30th. We're going to try to stick to that goal as much as possible. And I think we can do it, and I'm optimistic of what next year is going to look like.
Sharon, you and I lived through 23 extensions.
Exactly. So Brian stole my line about the extensions. And I think, kudos to the staff for having reached out early, and I hope we get it done. But I do think that there are a lot of things, as Mike said, that are not within our control, that insert themselves into the process that I think make it very, very hard. And so, although, I was going to say, I think the atmosphere in Washington hasn't been conducive to getting things done, but then again, we got an Inflation Reduction Act bill done, and an infrastructure bill done. So things can get done, I guess is the point, but I think it's going to be tough. And the election will matter.
All right. So this is not specific to your boss or your organization, but just in your own humble opinion, what do you think the top 4 or 5 issues are going to be on the next reauthorization? No particular order. Just jump right in there.
Drew, this is your conference.
I mean, for us, and I think for a lot of others, workforce is going to be preeminent, not just for pilots, but also maintenance technicians. I mean, COVID is the great disruptor. and we were dealing with it before, and COVID just made it worse. I think aligned with that, of course, is its implications on small community air service. EAS is in a lot of pain right now, and there's a lot of communities frustrated. So I'm sure those will come up, and then I think there's just the whole gamut of perpetual issues that we need to push forward and solve. ATC, modernization, both with the technology and the workforce. It's a long-standing priority. Hopefully, selfishly, I hope we go about it a little bit different way this time. But I'll leave it with those three and let other people add on to it.
Are there big issues for the next reauth?
Yeah, you're going to see drones, AAM, the new entrants, those issues, and related to that, perhaps things related to FAA's work on launch and reentry. There's for those who aren't familiar with the space side, there's been a moratorium in law that prevents regulation of human commercial space flight, and that moratorium on regulation ends next year. I don't think the FAA is going to step in and start requiring how many G's a seat requires or anything like that, or seat pitch or anything on any of these things. But it will start, a dialogue will probably start on that. So that's another, so those issues of the new entrants, how do they fit in? How do they pay, perhaps? So there's a few issues there that are pretty big. Always lots of little airport issues, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree with Drew on the workforce issues. I think those are going to be front and center and won't be easy, given the differences there are with between industry and labor. I wish they were easier. Frankly, I agree ATC staffing and modernization continues to be a theme, and no, we're not going to be pursuing anything like ATC reform. We've learned that lesson, but it doesn't mean that the problem has gone away. And in a time when we care more and more about sustainability, there are more and more reasons to have a more efficient system. And speaking of sustainability, we have spent, and we announced new environmental goals for Airlines for America and our carriers this year. 2030, we're hoping to have 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel available on a cost competitive basis, and then a net zero by 2050 goal that's really important to us. But that's going to take, I think, industry and government working together, which we have been so far. Thankful to Congress and the administration, Congress for passing the blender's tax credit. That's going to make a big difference, but there are still many other things that can be done on SAF.
None of the staffers have said
No. I'll add to that. I agree with Mike in terms of new entrants is going to be a huge area. I think we're going to focus on, just because it's one of the fastest growing industries or technologies we're seeing in aviation. I think 10, 20 years from now, aviation is going to look a lot different due to AAM, the emergence of AAM and drones. So AAM, drones, commercial space, new entrants, I think that's going to be a huge focus. Sustainability, again, as Sharon said, I mean, the blender's tax credit was just passed. There was a SAF infrastructure grant program, the IRA, some big programs really focused on making sustainable aviation fuels more commercially available, and so we're hoping those things can help A4A and RAA and other folks meet their sustainability goals. If I was to add to that, sustainability, climate change in general, I think it's going to be something we're going to try to focus on, whether it's expanding current infrastructure programs or building upon the ones that were recently passed. I think it's going to be a continuing focus. But yeah, I mean, there's a number of mandates and requirements in 2018 reauthorization bill that my boss is still trying to get done. So my boss has been pinging the FAA on flight attendant duty rules and secondary barriers, something that was supposed to be implemented 4 years ago. So that's going to be a big focus, focusing on kind of the mandates that still need to be done, and just trying to figure out how we can get FAA to move a little bit quicker with a little bit more transparency in issuing some of these rules out too. So I think those are all going to be a big focus in the next FAA Reauth.
I was on a call earlier today, and I said if all we did in the next bill is tell FAA to do what they were supposed to do in the 2018 bill, that's halfway to a good bill already. But everything that everyone has said is obviously going to be in the mix. My boss, ranking member Sam Graves, is a general aviation pilot, cares deeply about the general aviation community, and a lot of the trends and a lot of the changes that have rippled through the aviation industry have also rippled through general aviation. So one of his priorities is going to be hopefully including the first ever standalone general aviation title to revitalize and renew interest in general aviation, if for no other reason than it trickles out into each component of aviation. If we're talking about workforce, you don't go from high school right into a flight deck, as everyone knows. You're usually a general aviation pilot first. So ensuring the health of that community and ensuring its availability and accessibility is going to be really important if we're going to, in the long term, address the workforce needs of the broader aerospace industry.
We got Chris and Ron's left. So.
Yeah, I would just add, I think when I think about priorities in terms of the reauthorization, and I think what everybody said up here is true, and maybe I just add a different veneer to it. And I think that thematically, you have to think about technology, you have to think about workforce, you have to think about sustainability, and you have to think about FAA oversight. And those four themes cut across different parts of the aviation spectrum. Because everything's going to be up for grabs next year. We talked about GA, we talked about airports, we talked about air operators. We haven't talked about manufacturers. Let's talk about manufacturers. We're talking about new entrants. But all those things, these themes are going to be played across all of these different subsets. And so I think you'll see that we'll be wrestling with trying these difficult policy questions that we're wrestling with, whether it's for air operators and staffing, or air traffic control and FAA oversight over manufacturing. But all these ideas, are at play, I think, in all of these subject matter areas. And so I think it's going to be incumbent upon us and you all to help us think about how we should address these questions. But it's going to be a healthy debate. It already has been, and looking forward to it.
Well, Drew mentioned workforce issues, but for NACA, and I know it's gotten a lot of discussion here, is the pilot shortage. And one of our carriers, Allegiant, has done a lot of work in this area, and it's all available on our website, weflyforyou.com, and 4 is with the number 4. But the ramifications of this are significant. We believe it will impact the entire industry, not just the regional carriers. We represent the ULCCs, but our data shows that there's going to be a shortfall of about 28,000 pilots by the end of the decade, and that's going to cost the industry about $50 billion and 1,800 grounded aircraft, so you can do the math. What we're looking for is a dialogue. I mean, you guys saw the truck out there, the Alpha truck and the signage. And that's the kind of thing we'd like to put aside and begin a dialogue. We asked the Secretary of Transportation to host a meeting of all stakeholders to look at the data. Some of the pilot unions deny that there's a problem. Well, we'd like to see their data and determine the scope of the problem, and then start to talk about policy solutions. So I think that's going to be a big issue on the bill, and it's certainly going to take up a lot of political bandwidth, but really is the ideal time to address it. The timing of the bill couldn't be better. So.
And Chris, that's a good segue into my next question. Staff know that a big focus of the last reauthorization was workforce, and it was bipartisan. There was a tremendous amount of interest, both in workforce shortage across the industry, as well as ensuring that there's diversity in the workforce. Granted, we didn't do a lot of mandates, but we did a lot of studies. We did a lot of working groups. They are all completing their work if they haven't already. There's good reports that have come out with lots of recommendations. But I'd be interested, those on the panel that want to talk about it, what they think some solutions are to the pilot shortage and how that might be addressed in the next reauthorization.
I'll start again. No. I think there's a whole gamut of solutions. I think to Chris's point, it's incredibly important that we have to have a dialogue with stakeholders in the industry, including our union partners. And we need to have an acknowledgement that the shortage exists, because if we can't acknowledge there's a shortage, then we can't have a conversation about solutions. And hopefully in that conversation, there are overlapping areas where we can do something about it, right? The shortage, to Hunter's point, starts early on with a lack of interest in GA, and there's a whole pipeline somebody has to go through in order to eventually work for a regional airline, ultra low-cost carrier, or a major carrier. So we need to be able to figure out within that pipeline where our solutions are. But in the RAA's view, the solutions on the shortage for the near term are raising pilot retirement age to 67. You can already fly past age 65 in the US if you're a business operator or in the Part 135 space for scheduled service. Other countries have increased it, and we think the current regulatory system provides necessary safeguards. Not forget there's 2 pilots in the cockpit. And then in addition to that, student loans have been talked about a lot, making sure that it's right-sized for the cost of education and training. And then, I think one area we can look at additionally is there's a, workforce grant program for pilots that was reauthorized in the 2018 law. And right now, you can only do teacher development with it, or curriculum development. Can we expand that to do more to help create interest and support a robust pipeline that we can eventually all take advantage of and help attract more people to the profession, but also diversify it so it looks like the communities we all serve and that we've made a commitment to representing on our flight decks.
Anyone else?
We agree with all those things. In the near term, we think raising the mandatory retirement age from 65 to 67 would be a good short-term measure. There's going to be about 12,000 mandatory retirements over the next 5 years. So I mentioned the shortfall is about 28,000. So that gets you not even halfway there. In the long term, it's a tougher issue, but we'd like to get more credit for simulator training towards the 1,500-hour threshold. We think that would result in a better quality pilot and certainly be consistent with the 2010 Safety Act. You looked at how technology has changed since the Colgan accident and how sophisticated simulators are with VR and AR technology. And it's something we'd like to get lawmakers to come out and see a simulator. We'd like to get the Colgan families to come out to see this technology. But again, our efforts to reach out to these groups have gone unanswered. So again, that's why we're calling for the Secretary to take a leadership role in this area like he's done on consumer issues. So.
Yeah, like with most of the workforce issues, there's probably no silver bullet. I mean, even if, to touch the third rail here, like the 1,500-hour rule, even if you got rid of that, there were still going to be issues. Yeah. I mean, it's more of a hurdle, not like a complete obstacle. So I mean, your workforce issues are throughout the economy, especially in technical jobs and above, and other sectors are attracting people that in the past might have come into aviation. And I mean, some of that's in space. You hope that some of the folks, the new space efforts are, getting a lot of people interested in STEM, and you hope that has a general positive effect on workforce for the kinds of people that are needed throughout aviation as well. So, I think it's going to be, a lot of little things you hope to ameliorate it while you just sort of try to muddle through a little bit too in the meantime.
So there were recent stories in the news out of Dubuque, Iowa, where they've lost some air service. And there's been lots of news stories about loss of air service or disrupted air service, particularly to small communities. The Dubuque story was interesting because there's a tribe there that's actually put forth quite a bit of money to try to come up with a national coalition to address the impact to air service in small communities. And there's a coalition called Rally for Air Service that already exists and is being put together to look at this issue and to try to come up with some solutions and share information on the impacts. What solutions do you think might come into play, particularly in the reauthorization, particularly to address air service disruption or loss of air service? And I'd really like to hear from the staffers on this one.
I'll take a crack. Obviously we've seen a lot of stories when carriers pull down routes and talking about the effects of the pilot shortage and what kind of effects that has on the decisions to pull down routes. And I'm not an airline network planner. Those guys, as far as I'm concerned, look at a Ouija board and figure it out, and it's very complicated and it's way beyond me. But there's a lot of factors that are going into what's happening to air service right now. It's not just a pilot shortage, right? It's small jet economics are kind of broken. You can't spread the costs out over that many passengers, especially on relatively fuel inefficient aircraft in an era where it's $100 barrel oil. I'll step back to the last question real quick. Is what is Congress going to do to fix the pilot shortage? I'm not sure there's anything that Congress can do. Just silver bullet, and snap our fingers and the pilot shortage is fixed. I think what we can do is look at how we can shape the environment and set the conditions for the industry to attract and recruit enough well-qualified pilots. And that begins with figuring out what is a well-qualified pilot and how do you measure quality. Is it simply by hours? And like Mike said, and like Chris said, with simulators, a lot's changed since 2010. The military does not train their pilots the way they did in 2010. No one does training the way they did in 2010. My wife just went through medical training, and they have very realistic simulators for doing surgeries, and you can practice surgery 1,000 times before ever seeing a patient. And so in terms of how that impacts small community air service, the trouble I see there is that because we can't snap our fingers and fix the pilot shortage, even if we could, I'm not sure what that does for small communities. Certainly some will restore their air service, but you've just fixed one corner of the problem. You haven't fixed, well, what do we do about fuel inefficient planes? What do we do about opportunity costs? Because we can have that pilot fly a larger plane on a larger route, and everything's a lot better. EAS costs, for example, are through the roof right now. I think Presque Isle now has a $12 million a year EAS contract, where before, if someone was at $4 or $5 million a year, that was outrageous.
Yeah.
So costs are going up across the board. We see that with inflation every day. So it's just a long, rambling way of saying we can't predict what is happening in aviation because it's all changing so fast, and the moment we try to pin it down, it seems to change again. And so all we can do is try to set the conditions for future growth and hope that that growth is not artificially constrained by workforce shortage or all those other factors.
First of all, I really appreciate that answer from Hunter, and I'll just add that one stakeholder will name names. One of their themes is do no harm. So, sometimes being a professional staff member, as much as great ideas that you put forward, some of it's just keeping bad ideas from becoming law. And that I think gets to the point that Hunter just made on the dynamic situation that we're going through. I mean, we just came out of, well, apparently the crisis, the COVID or the pandemic is over. Maybe COVID's still here, but you know, we've just gone through a hell of a thing in aviation with COVID, and you know, it's affected our workforce, our operations, FAA oversight, you name it. Every part of the industry and the sector has been impacted, and you know, the ripple effect of that wave is still ongoing, and so the solutions that we come up today might not be the solutions we need tomorrow. So I think, if anything, that Congress acts, is it has to be based on this word has been used already, but I'll emphasize it has to be based on data, and we have to have the right data that indicates and the right information that helps inform our decision making. And so when we talk about, you know, pilot staffing issues, or we're talking about, you know, service to small communities, you know, and we look to you guys to help us fill in that picture, but we need the data to help us arrive to the right conclusions. And then, of course, it has to be timely and has to be adaptive to how things change. And so, you know, we're certainly attuned to the fact that the system's under stress, you know, and we recognize that, and we want to be helpful, but we also want to do no harm in the sense of doing things that might not be the right solution a year from now, 2 years from now.
Yeah. No, I would just echo that. You know, I know there are a number of proposals in front of Congress that we're actively considering. And I think my boss is open to, you know, a number of solutions to help address some of the workforce constraints that we've seen in the aviation industry. That's really echoing kind of the same workforce issues we've seen across the country. Every industry has been having workforce issues. In terms of the specific proposals, 100% echo what Ron just said. Just do no harm. I mean, even the perception that we could be negatively affecting safety is something, you know, we would have concerns about. I do think that, you know, we also want to focus on, you know, if we're talking about a supply and demand problem, well, let's focus on the pipeline of workers entering the field, expanding that pipeline, diversifying the pipeline, making sure that, you know, kids that traditionally wouldn't pursue a career in aviation start thinking about that. And I think we started to do that in the 2018 FAA Reauthorization bill. And I think there's a lot of interest in making some of those programs bigger and strengthening those programs, expanding them to other professions within the aviation field. So I think that's going to be kind of the focus. But I also agree with Hunter in terms of that's one aspect of you know, what we're seeing in terms of the loss of service to small and rural communities. I think that's a multi-faceted issue, and there's a number of things I think that feed into that, and not just the workforce part. And it's a real concern for my boss. I know it's a concern for a lot of folks on the committee, and you know, whether it's the economics not working the same way they did in the past, or if it's other issues that we can kind of help address. I think there's a lot of interest in trying to do that.
Great, thank you all. I'm going to open it up and see if there are any questions. I have more myself. Okay, seeing none, I will carry on. In the last 3 years, Congress has given aerospace and the entire aviation industry a lot of money. I think it's northward of $51 billion. I'm curious if you guys believe that will have any impact on what happens with funding in the next reauthorization.
I'll
Yes.
take that one first.
Flip it, one word answer.
You know, we've already, unfortunately, seen a lot of rhetoric about, you know, Airlines got $51 billion, so why is my flight delayed? And I think that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the PSP program and what it was. The fact that it, you know, by law, it had to go directly to payroll. which is why our unions were some of the biggest supporters, hand in hand with us, of the program. I also think people don't understand that when you combine the grants and the loans, the loans have all been paid back now, the program covered about 75% of our payroll, so it clearly didn't cover all of the payroll. Now, all of that to say, we are extremely grateful for PSP, and we've said 1,000 times and will continue to say it was a lifeline for our industry. And you absolutely would have seen bankruptcies had it not happened. You still saw some bankruptcies anyway, right, in the regional community. Look at what's happening in Europe right now. They didn't have that kind of a program, and if you think it's bad here, it is worse there. It's absolutely worse. So unfortunately, I think for whatever reason, we have to continue to educate people about the program and the fact that the monies weren't misused. They went exactly to pay payroll. And so I do think that's going to color the discussion. But, again, big boys and girls here in DC, and we'll deal with that. And happy to continue to have that discussion, and, praise Chair DeFazio and Chairwoman Cantwell for their work on an incredible program.
Hunter, did you want to?
No, I'll stick with yes and for more, see Sharon.
Well, Holly, just one side point. I think it does impact some of the industry asks. One issue we thought of, and we talked about it with Sharon, is 5G equipage grants. And we just thought, given the environment and all the money we had just received from PSP, it would be a tough sell politically, but I think we would have had a strong argument on the policy, given the FCC had green-lighted this. And now we're essentially stuck with the bill and may have to equip twice. So it clearly has an impact on I think, the policy agenda.
Yeah, Sharon, when you were speaking, the staffers were all nodding, so that's a good sign that they understand what the PSP was intended for and how it was used. I do think that that's just what airlines got. Airports got money, manufacturers got money. There was a lot of money, and it was needed. I'm not arguing that it wasn't needed, but it'll be interesting to see how that impacts members' willingness to fork out a ton more money in the next reauthorization. In the last reauthorization, we had a lot of provisions on consumer protections, and I'm curious what everyone's thoughts are on whether there's going to be a lot of appetite, interest in that from the member perspective in this upcoming reauthorization.
Well, I think now that we've got all green check marks on our report card, it's all taken care of. I'm just kidding.
Hopeful. Wishful thinking.
Not every carrier.
Yeah,
that's right.
Every member flies if they're not driving or taking a train back to their home district, at some point they're flying somewhere on a pretty regular basis. So they see things day to day, and sometimes even those who are reluctant to regulate can't help but want to try and get involved in some way to address, something that happened to them, a relative, on many different areas. Sometimes there's any number of reasons. Sometimes it may be related to TSA even. There's a whole other topic of discussion. But there's always likely to be tweaks. Again, this may be an area where, depending on who's in control of which chamber, things get pushed more than other times. One area that there was a lot of consensus on that people did try and help was the disabled community and the Paralyzed Veterans Association. They're very effective advocates for the needs, and like it or not, there are kind of the horror stories around wheelchairs and other things. So, there was a whole subtitle in the consumer part, I think, dealing just with the disabled. It was a very robust title in that regard, as you remember. So I think whether there's tweaks to some of those things, there's definitely going to be an interest. On the Commerce Committee alone, Blumenthal and Markey are always charging ahead on a number of those issues. But my guess is there'll be something done, perhaps not quite as much as last time. There was quite a bit. But, issues are still out there. And, the pandemic, again, has left, people with different impressions, all the cancellations and everything else, right or wrong, whoever's to blame. It still sort of drives, people's perceptions or what they think the airlines might do. And in some ways, there's still the mindset of, and with the money that they got, right or wrong, that like it's quasi-utility. And that, Congress, like a board of directors on some level, and needs to like get involved and, make corrections. So, there's not a small chance that there will be something. Whether it's a lot or not, we'll see. Some may depend on if DOT pushes ahead and aggravates the industry and things like that. So on that issue, probably going to see something, but where that comes down remains to be seen.
Great. Anybody want to add to that?
Well, a big issue for us is efforts to regulate seat pitch. There was a study done by the FAA, follow-up to the last FAA bill, directing the FAA to look at the impact seat pitch has on cabin evacuation times. And the FAA did the study and included that seat pitch, at least not till you get to about 25 inches, does not adversely impact evacuation times. That's a core component of the ultra low-cost carrier business model, and we think a lot of the consumer groups, are pushing. It's more of a comfort issue for them. The FAA is actually taking public comments on the study they did, and we plan to issue comments on that, but we do expect that issue to come up yet again. So.
Great. One last chance. Any questions from the audience? Okay. My last question, and this is for the entire panel. Quick answer, because we are just about out of time, but pulling out your crystal ball a little bit. Anything that you think could impact getting the bill done next year? And yes, I know there's so many things that could be done. And we'll start with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the timeline, coupled with, a lack of stakeholder consensus that, gums up the works over the bill. I mean, you've got, certain stakeholders right now being really aggressive in their messaging that, won't, allow for the easiest level of collaboration. And if that continues to, if that kind of infects the broader process as we go into next year, it's not going to make it easy.
Yeah, I'd say, right now we've all talked about, kind of assuming this is going to be a bipartisan process. If that's not the case, then you can't get a bill done. It's just that simple. No matter what happens in the Senate, you're not getting, one party with 60 votes. And so if the bipartisan wheels fall off this, then the wheels have fallen off.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately the pilot shortage issue could be a tough one to address, especially as you get members from the Midwest who are seeing their service adversely impacted will, I think step into this pretty heavily, and that could hold up the bill, especially on the Senate side, where it doesn't take much to derail things. So hope I'm wrong. It shouldn't be a difficult issue. That's why, we're trying to start a dialogue now so we can try to work through these issues before the real work begins on the FAA bill. So time will tell.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the last time there was pure regular order and on-time bill, I can't quite remember. There's usually some type of extension. The 2018 bill was mammoth, a tremendous effort by a lot of folks up here, but it's still, there was a 2016 sort of reauthorization light, where a few things that sort of had to get done got done. And then, even down to the end, we had to have a 3-day extension just to get the 2018 bill done. And of course, infamously, the 2012 bill had 20+ extensions. Some of the issues that kept that from coming to fruition at an earlier point may come out again. So it's tough. I mean, something will have to be, and there'll have to be, an extension. There's other counter-drone authorities. There's a lot of issues that could come to a head that are just challenging, maybe whether they're partisan or not. It just could take a lot of work. So it's going to be a challenge to be right on time.
I think it's tough to get done quickly, and I think that's because of both the issues that we've talked about today that are not always easy, but probably the determining factor will be the politics, how the election turns out, and how we're able to work together.
Yeah, I mean, when I first came on the subcommittee, it was January, February 2019, and the staff would just pass a big reauthorization bill, and the general theme was, nothing else to really work on now until the next reauthorization, nothing big in aviation. And then second Boeing crash happened, subsequent investigation, the pandemic happened with 3 related bills in aviation, aircraft certification bill happened. I mean, it's just, you can't predict this industry. So yes, there is a very high likelihood something could happen that could delay this bill being on time, but I think the intent is to get it done, and we're going to try as hard as possible to do it.
Well, I'll take a different tack since we have a lot of obstacles that we've identified, and I'll just say that I'll identify the need that we need to get this done, and that we need a strong reauthorization for the future, because when we look out 5 years from next year, we're talking about the future of the global aviation landscape in terms of U.S. competitiveness and where we fit within that landscape. So providing direction to the FAA, providing direction to the industry, laying the foundations for new technology. As we talked about today, the industry that we have today is going to look a lot different now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So what work we can get done to lay the foundations for that future, that better future that we all want to see, is going to be really important. And so I'm optimistic that with that in mind, we can try to do our best. Yes, there will be obstacles. The election will matter. Politics will matter. Big major issues like federal preemption could come up, and things that's part of what makes this field so fascinating. I'm sure what drew you to this room is the fact that in aviation, it grabs at everything that you can imagine, and that's the challenge we face. But that's also the opportunity we have to work on this reauthorization and make it a reality.
Well, I'll finish up by saying in my tenure on the Hill, I worked on 7 reauthorizations, and 4 got done. So there is hope. One of them got done with a divided Congress in 11 months. So it can happen. These are usually pretty bipartisan, and we can work through. There's usually some sticky issue that comes up, but we can work through it. So hope is eternally there. So thank you all. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Holly, and thanks to the entire panel. We know that FAA reauthorization season is a really busy and demanding season for Washington advocates. The work that all of you do on behalf of aviation is so important, so thank you very much for being with us today.